Dragon's Forge, your single source for deck text, lore, and strategy. Today's commander is Braids, Conjurer, Adept. For 2, a blue and a blue, we have a legendary creature, Human Wizard. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player may put an artifact, creature, or land card from their hand onto the battlefield, and she has 2 power and 2 toughness. As for our win conditions using Braids, we intend to win the game by taking full advantage of her ability to cheat in very large creatures at a very early stage of the game, using things along the lines of Eldrazi's with Annihilator, just to overwhelm the opponent before they have a chance to set up. Now, who exactly is Braids as far as her story? The original Braids, unlike most Dimension casters, maintained a fair degree of lucidity, making her much more useful to the Cabal beyond simply being a pit fighter. The name Braids was a nickname due to her hairstyle, as her actual Cabalist name was Fulla, while her secret name was Bara. The Braids that we're talking about today comes from an alternate reality. In the Planar Chaos set, the card Braids Conjurer Adept depicts an alternate version of Braids, where she became a magical researcher instead of joining the Cabal. As for the other 99 of the deck, we start with Mana Ramp. We have Cryptolith Fragment for 3. Cryptolith Fragment enters the battlefield tapped. You tap it to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Each player loses 1 life. At the beginning of your upkeep, if each player has 10 or less life, transform Cryptolith Fragment. Cryptolith Fragment transforms into Aurora of Emrakul. It has Flying and Death Touch. Whenever Aurora of Emrakul attacks, each opponent loses 3 life, and it has 1 power and 4 toughness. Cultivator Drone for 2 and a blue. We have Devoid. Tap and add 1 colorless to your mana pool. Spend this mana only to cast a colorless spell, activate an ability of a colorless permanent, or pay a cost that contains the colorless symbol. Eldrazi Sky Spawner for 2 and a blue. We have Devoid, Flying. When Eldrazi Sky Spawner enters the battlefield, put a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion creature token onto the battlefield. It has sacrificed this creature, add 1 colorless to your mana pool. Hedron Archive for 4. You can tap it to add 2 colorless mana. Then you can also pay 2 and tap it to sacrifice Hedron Archive. Draw 2 cards. High Tide for 1 blue. Until the end of the turn, all islands produce an additional blue when tapped for mana. Kozilek's Channeler for 5 generic. You can tap it to add 2 generic to your mana pool. Mind Stone for 2 generic. You can tap it to add 1 colorless. You can pay 1 generic to tap, sacrifice Mind Stone, and draw a card. Prismatic Lens for 2. You can tap it to add 1 colorless. You can pay 1 generic to tap and add 1 mana of any color. Shrine of the Forsaken Gods. You can tap it to add 1 colorless, or you can tap it to add 2 colorless and spend this mana only to cast colorless spells. Activate this ability only if you control 7 or more lands. Silver Mirror for 2 generic. You can tap it to add 1 blue to your mana pool. Sky Diamond for 2 generic. Sky Diamond enters the battlefield tap. You can tap it to add 1 blue to your mana pool. Soul Ring for 1 generic. You can tap it to add 2 generic. Warden of Geometries for 4 generic. Vigilance. Tap to add 1 colorless to your mana pool. Warping Whale for 1 generic, 1 colorless. Choose 1, exile target creature with power toughness 1 or less. Counter target sorcery spell, or put a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion creature token onto the battlefield. It has sacrificed this creature, add 1 generic to your mana pool. For draw, we have Anticipate for 1 and a blue. Look at the top 3 cards of your library, put 1 of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. Arc of Orazca, it has Ascend, and then you can tap it to add 1 generic to your mana pool, or you can pay 5 and tap it to draw a card. Activate this ability only if you have the Sidding's Blessing. Bident of Thassa for 2, a blue. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. You can pay 1 generic and 1 blue to tap it. Creatures your opponents control attack this turn if able. Blighted Cataract. Tap it to add 1 generic to your mana pool, or you can pay 5 and a blue to tap it and sacrifice Blighted Cataract to draw 2 cards. Bonder's Enclave, you can tap it to add 1 generic, or you can pay 3 and tap it to draw a card. Activate this ability only if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. Brainstorm, for 1 blue, draw 3 cards, then put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. Compulsive Research, for 2 and a blue, target player draws 3 cards, then that player discards 2 cards unless he or she discards a land card. Cryptic Caves, you can tap it to add 1 generic, or pay 1 and tap it to sacrifice Cryptic Caves. Draw a card, activate this ability only if you control 5 or more lands. Deep Fathom Skulker, for 5 and a blue, he has Devoid. When a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. And you can also pay 3 generic and 1 colorless. Target creature can't be blocked this turn. Endbringer, for 5 and a colorless. Untap Endbringer during each other player's untap step. You can tap Endbringer to deal 1 damage to target creature or player, or you can pay 1 and tap him. The target creature can't attack or block this turn, or you can pay 2 colorless to tap him and draw a card. Then we have Hedron Archive, Loyal Drake, for 2 and a blue. He has Flying and Lieutenant. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control your commander, draw a card. Memorial to Genius. Memorial to Genius enters the battlefield tapped. You can tap it to add a blue. You can pay 4 and a blue, tap it and sacrifice Memorial to Genius and draw 2 cards. Mind Stone, Reconnaissance Mission. Whenever a creature you deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card, and it has Cycling for 2, so you can discard this card and draw a card. Rush of Knowledge, for 4 and a blue. Draw cards equal to the highest converted mana cost among permanents you control. Moving on to single target interaction, we start with Bident of Thassa. Blinding Drone, for 1 and a blue. It has Devoid. You pay 1 colorless. Tap him. Tap target creature. Counter spell. For 2 blue. Counter target spell. Endbringer. Hand of Emrakul. For 9. You may sacrifice 4 Eldrazi spawn rather than pay Hand of Emrakul's mana cost. And then it has Annihilator 1. Kozilek's Pathfinder. For 6. You can pay 1 colorless. Target creature can't block Kozilek's Pathfinder this turn. Negate, for 1 and a blue. Counter target non-creature spell. Rewind, for 2, a blue and a blue. Counter target spell. Untap up to 4 lands. Spell Pierce, for 1 blue. Counter target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 2. Vanishing, for 1 blue. You enchant target creature. For 2 blue, enchanted creature phases out. Void Shatter, for 1, a blue and a blue. It's got Devoid. Counter target spell. If that spell is countered this way, exile it instead of putting it into its owner's graveyard. And then we have Warping Whale. Moving on to mass removal, we have Aetherize. For 3 and a blue, return all attacking creatures to their owner's hand. Aether Spouts, for 3, a blue and a blue. For each attacking creature, its owner puts it on top or bottom of his or her library. Aether Gale, for 3, a blue and a blue. Return 6 target non-land permanents to their owner's hand. Artisan of Kozilek, for 9. When you cast a spell, you may return target creature card from your hand to the graveyard, and it has Annihilator 2. Bane of Balaged, for 7, whenever Bane of Balaged attacks, defending player exiles 2 permanents he or she controls. Breaker of Armies, for 8, all creatures able to block Breaker of Armies do so. Curse of Swine, for X, a blue and a blue, exile X target creatures. For each creature exiled this way, its controller puts a 2/2 green boar creature token onto the battlefield. Engulf the Shore, for 3 and a blue. Return to their owner's hands all creatures with toughness less than or equal to the number of islands you control. River's Rebuke, for 4, a blue and a blue. Return all non-land permanents target player controls to their owner's hand. Scourge of Fleets, for 5, a blue and a blue. When Scourge of Fleets enters the battlefield, return each creature your opponents control with toughness X or less to its owner's hand, where X is the number of islands you control. Ulamog's Crusher, for 8. He has Annihilator 2. Washout, for 3 and a blue. Return all permanents of the color of your choice to their owner's hands. Moving on to protection, we have Hisoka's Guard. For 1 and a blue, You may choose not to untap Hisoka's Guard during your untap step. You can pay 1 and a blue to tap as long as Hisoka's Guard remains tapped. Target creature you control other than Hisoka's Guard can't be the target of spells or abilities. Lightning Greaves for 2. Equipped creature has haste and shroud and has an equip cost of 0. Nurok Stealth Suit for 2. Equipped creature can't be the target of spells or abilities. And then for 2 blue, attach Nurok Stealth Suit to target creature you control, or you have an equip cost of 1. Swiftfoot Boots for 2. Equipped creature has hexproof and haste, and an equip cost of 1. Vanishing Whisper Silk Cloak for 3. Equipped creature can't be blocked and has shroud, and an equipped cost of 2. Moving on to our cloning cards. We start off with Clone for 3 and a blue. You may have Clone enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield. Deceiver of Form for 6 and a generic. At the beginning of combat on your turn, reveal the top card of your library. If a creature card is revealed this way, you may have creatures you control other than Deceiver of Form become copies of that card until the end of the turn. You may put that card on the bottom of your library. Mercurial Pretender for 4 and a blue. You may have Mercurial Pretender enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature you control, except it gains 2, a blue and a blue. Return this creature to its owner's hand. Quicksilver Gargantuan for 5, a blue and a blue. You may have Quicksilver Gargantuan enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, except it's still 7/7. Vesuvan Shapeshifter for 3, a blue and blue. As Vesuvan Shapeshifter enters the battlefield or is turned face up, you may choose another creature on the battlefield. If you do, until Vesuvan Shapeshifter is turned face down, it becomes a copy of that creature, except it has at the beginning of your upkeep. You may turn this creature face down. It has a morph cost of 1 and a blue. Vizier of Many Faces for 2, a blue and a blue. You may have Vizier of Many Faces enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, except if Vizier of Many Faces was embalmed. The token has no mana cost, it's white, and it's a zombie in addition to its other types. It has an embalm cost of 3, a blue and a blue. Moving on into standalone cards, we have Aeon Engine for 5. Aeon Engine enters the battlefield tapped. Tap and exile Aeon Engine, reverse the game's turn order. Archetype of Imagination for 4, a blue and a blue. Creatures you control have flying. Creatures your opponents control lose flying and can't have or gain flying. Benthic Infiltrator for 2 and a blue. It has Devoid and Ingest. Benthic Infiltrator can't be blocked. Then we have Braids, Conjurer, Adept. Eldrazi Devastator for 8, and it has Trample. Eldrazi Mimic for 2. Whenever another colorless creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may change Eldrazi Mimic's base power and toughness to that creature's power and toughness until the end of the turn. Gravity Negator for 3 and a blue. It has Devoid and Flying. When Gravity Negator attacks, you may pay 1 colorless. If you do, another target creature gains flying until the turn. Inkwell Leviathan for 7, a blue and a blue. It has Island Walk, Trample, and Shroud. Ulamog's Despoiler for 6, as Ulamog's Despoiler enters the battlefield, you may put 2 cards your opponents own from exile into their owner's graveyards. If you do, Ulamog's Despoiler enters the battlefield with 4 +1/+1 counters on it. Wonder for 3 and a blue. It has flying as long as Wonder is in your graveyard and you control an island. Creatures you control have. For our lands that weren't already mentioned, we have 28 islands. Myriad Landscape. Myriad Landscape enters the battlefield tapped. You can tap it to add 1 colorless, or you can pay 2 and tap it to sacrifice Myriad Landscape. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards that share a land type. Put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. Rogue's Passage. You can tap it to add 1 colorless, or you can pay 4 generic and tap. Target creature can't be blocked this turn. As for our Nuggets pick, we have Vanishing. Vanishing has the ability to phase out, specifically our commander, Braids. And when Braids phases out, she no longer exists until our following untap step, which gets around the big weakness of Braids itself, being that she can enable your opponents to get those big, powerful key cards out. So by utilizing Vanishing with her, you avoid that big drawback and you keep the advantage for yourself. At the point of recording and utilizing TCG Player optimization, I found that the average deck list on EDH Rec came out to $296.92. Our deck comes in at $49.49, and that gives us a total savings of $247.43. Check the description below for links to the deck list and our social media, and remember to forge on.